Okay, welcome everyone to this talk, right, that I gave. And nowadays I just go with, instead of making a live recording, I just do it here in my little studio, right? So it's a little bit better. Well, I don't have any reactions, but kind of the quality is much better than if I do a live recording. So I recently got very excited about pictures, picture recognition, and how, like, right? So I just came back to Australia, and during immigration, you have to scan your passport, and they make a little photo of your video of your face, and then you move a little bit further, and then they check your face again. So there's some way to automatically detect the face, right? Picture recognition, automatically detect whatever, right? And I was just thinking, or I got very excited about the opportunity to use kind of the same idea in mathematics, right? So instead of having a face that you want to recognize because you have some immigration into some country, you want to recognize a mathematical object. And I just got very fascinated by those guys here. So I really would like to recognize, can you tell what it is? I really would like to recognize knots. Yeah? So knot detector. What I really have in mind is a knot detector. Yeah? In a sense that hopefully there will be an app at one point in my life where you can just download it on your phone, take a picture of a knot, and it will tell you what knot it is. Okay, and today I would like to motivate a little bit why that would be nice. Certainly less exciting than picture recognition, face recognition, I guess. But still, why this would be nice, why this is an interesting problem in itself, and how you would like to, or how we would like to address this kind of question. Okay. So the motivation is, as I just said, I want to detect knots from images. Literally, I want a picture of a knot, and some machine type thing, AI, whatever, should tell me what knot it is. No? So a knot, just as a reminder, here's one of my favorite pictures of a knot. It's just a string in 3 space, and usually you just see one of the shadows. And as you can see in this picture here already, shadows are very different depending on depending where your light source is. The shadow might be really different, so the knot detection problem is not completely a trivial thing. So here, a picture I stole from a biology paper, and I forgot which one actually. If someone knows, let me know. And it's a protein, and they do the same, right? You see the protein shadow under the electron microscope or something, and you would like to recognize what type of knot it is. Because kind of fun fact, I will say that in a second again. If you have something very long, right? So you usually learn in chemistry that everything is built out of elements. And the elements determine all the chemical properties of whatever, a molecule or a compound. And that's kind of true, but it's only really true for small molecules. The longer they get, the more important it is how they actually sit in space. Yeah? So that's how you start. Kind of the easiest thing is to everything is just built out of those little circles, little balls, the elements, and what it is determined, or the chemical properties are completely determined by the type of elements you have. That's not quite true. For example, if you just remember that water is, for example, like this type of shape, and the shape actually matters and determines a lot of the properties. The bigger the molecules get, the bigger the compounds, I should say, get, the more the kind of secondary structure, how it sits in space, plays a role. And DNA or proteins or whatever, they're just long strings, and long strings like to get knotted. That's literally what it is. Yeah, so knot theory, kind of the study of strings in space. And I got really excited so here is an even better picture. Look at this. Isn't that beautiful? Here, let's do the same again that I just said. So everyone knows, hopefully, the DNA double helix, so the Gattaca sequence. It's made out of those little Gattaca things. But actually, DNA is really long. So here you can literally see that. A beautiful picture of DNA crowded in a cell. It's a very, very long string in a very, very tiny box. And essentially, there's a math theorem that you can make completely precise if you want. If you put a string in a box and you shake, then eventually the string will get knotted, essentially. Yeah, so DNA gets knotted, and the way it works is there's some enzymes that cut and recut the DNA. So here, this little black thing that you can barely see. Let me try to use my mouse here. So this little thing here actually is an enzyme that tries to cut the DNA knot that you can see here. Tries to cut it open. So that's what happens. So it's really, and so not theory, kind of fun, is this part of mathematics, which is actually super applicable. Yeah? It's kind of strange. It started much later. Long strings and small boxes get knotted, and eventually the type of knotting actually plays a big role here. And the way it works is the following. So this beautiful picture that I stole. So essentially the enzymes do one of those moves. They take the strings and reorganize them. So you can cut open or cut or close, or whatever it is. Cut open or reverse the operation on a knot. And here, for example, if you have a knotted thing, you can cut it open until it's just a circle, right? And the body needs to come up with a strategy. I'll show you some more nice pictures in a second. DNA needs to be undone. Yeah, the body really uses the. So in your body, this is happening all the time before DNA can multiply, because essentially, right, the DNA wants to break into two strings and then they go separate ways. But if the thing is knotted, you can literally try that yourself. So here's a donut, and if you cut a donut along that line, you can actually get that's what DNA would do, right? You would cut it in the middle and you get two pieces, but the two pieces don't separate, they're just knotted. Right? So if you really have a knotted DNA and you cut it in the middle, you get another knot. And they're still knotted and they can't go separate ways. So somehow you need to solve the knotting problem anyway, right? So this is what you need to do anyway. And it's kind of really important in the body, and just DNA knots are kind of really important, how they are formed in the body. Yeah? Let me just give you one example. So DNA can't multiply if the string is knotted, yeah, because it can't separate. So could you imagine, or let's imagine, you could somehow force DNA to knot itself in a way such that it can't unknot. Then it dies, right? It's dead. It won't multiply. That's a problem. That's called aging, by the way. So you might say, oh, why would you do that? Well, sometimes you have cells that you don't want to multiply. Think about cancer or viruses. So if you could really specifically target their DNA, knot it in a very difficult way, so it can't be undone, and the virus can't multiply, and the virus that doesn't multiply is very harmless, actually, right? So it's kind of a nice idea, which hopefully eventually you can actually put into kind of practical use, kind of knot the DNA and to force cancer cells or viruses or whatever to not be able to reproduce. So if you just, knot theory is super applicable, right? Said again, for DNA, long string, it actually matters what type of knot it is and how many moves you need. For this video, we don't really need to know that, but it's kind of a nice motivation. So it's actually really, biologists really do that. So here's one of my favorite pictures, which I actually again stole from a biology paper, and I forgot which one. But anyway, so the top row, yeah, so like here, you see literally a DNA knot under an electron microscope. Then someone has drawn it out and then recognized the knot. So the knots are organized by number of crossings, and then you just the first one on the list, number of crossings, the first one on the list, or whatever, number of crossings, the second one on the list, something like that, right? So here, let's zoom into that one. Someone just drew out the knot and then looked it up in a list of knots, right? The 6 crossings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the second knot on the list with 6 crossings. Here, 6 crossings, and the first knot on the list with 6 crossings. And when I learned that, I was like, it's 2025, or at least when I learned that it was 2025. How on earth is it possible that this is not automated? How on earth is it possible that someone sits there, draws out the knot, and then looks it up in a book and tries to recognize the knot. How on earth is that possible? There should be an automated way of doing that, right? So that's what motivated this whole problem. I want picture recognition of knots. I don't want anyone to do that by hand. That sounds very rude, but essentially AI will replace us anyway, in some sense. And this is something let's be realistic. This is something you shouldn't do by hand, right? This is something that should just be like your face. Your face should be scanned at an airport, and then the immigration is much smoother and much faster. Here you should just scan the knot, and it should just spit out the knot. It shouldn't be such a difficult problem. It gets quite fancy here, so this one is really beautiful. Look at that one. Look at that one here. Anyway, yeah, so this is pretty exciting or pretty strange, and I was like, holy fuck, I really want a knot detector here, right? So how is that even possible? Yeah, so let me just show you one more video before I forget. So here's a fun video, again from a biology paper, where they literally, so it's really an important problem, so they by hand knot a DNA string, and then they track how long it takes to be undone. So here you can see that, right? They knot this string, and will be a trefoil, flop, and now it's knotted. This little slider here tells you the height. So now it's height, middle height, if you want. Now it's up, now it's middle, now it's down, right? Now it's middle again. So it's really, beautiful, so beautiful. It really is a little DNA trefoil knot. Anyway, I said it again. Important problem, knot detection. But why on earth do you do that by hand, right? That was kind of the motivation I had in mind. So I thought a little bit about the kind of the abstract problem of detecting knots, right? Deciding whether two knots are the same is actually a really difficult problem. So even for something boring like those two knots here, which really just differ by, well, here the crossing, the one from here goes over and here it goes under. So that's the only difference between them. So are those the same knots? They're not the same, by the way. But yeah, so this is really non-difficult problem. Yeah, so not difficult problem. A difficult problem. Why do I say a non-difficult problem? I don't know. So detecting knots is supposed to be a difficult problem. So how on earth would you do that? It's kind of an interesting thing. I comment on that in a second. So here's the unknot. It's just a nasty picture of the unknot in the top left corner here. And yeah, so the various moves to undo the unknot. It's kind of a very nasty picture. So unknotting, even the unknotting problem, so not just detecting knots, but the easier problem to detect the unknot is not so clear how you can do it. And why this is an interesting problem for picture recognition is that this is much more subtle and much more difficult than whatever cat detection or face detection, because faces are actually pretty different. They are very, very different, or a cat is very different from a fire hydrant, right? So cat detection might not be so difficult, but knots are, if you look at the list of knots, they look very, very similar. And why this knot here at the top is unknotted is absolutely not clear, right? So just from the theoretical point of view, just forget all the DNA. DNA is fun, but forget all the DNA. Just from the theoretical point of view, the unknotting problem or the knot detection problem itself is interesting, and even as a problem for picture recognition, it's kind of interesting because it's somehow very different, or quite different from the standard picture recognition problems like face detection. Because most knots actually look very similar, right? So this is just an easy example. Those knots are not the same, but they look very, very similar. They look very, very similar. So most knots look very similar. So how would you even attack that problem is an interesting question in itself. So knotting is really difficult, right? So here, my motivation on one slide. Here are the mass knots. Let's zoom into the mass knots. And I mean, they look very similar. Look, it's 7-3 and 7-5. Or 7-6 and 7-7. 7-1 and 7-2 are almost the same. It's just, they look very, very similar. Right? That's kind of difficult, very different from faces. So how would it even work? So yeah, so knots are really hard. So develop an automated method to extract data from knot images. That would be great. And I really want that. And the goal is to develop, let's say, a convolutional neural network model, like explain in a second what a convolutional neural network is, or a transformer. A transformer is probably better, but for that project here, we just focused on a convolutional neural network. It's kind of a little bit easier. Transformer is a little bit better because convolution, we'll see that in a second, it's mostly looking for local patterns, and a transformer, because of attention, is a little bit nicer for global patterns, if you want. But anyway, you don't need to know that. I will explain what a CNN is anyway. No? And even such an easy problem, to just identify the number of crossings, wasn't all that easy. It looks like an easy problem, but it wasn't all that easy. But that actually works. And then the main idea is to... So I don't think it will directly work to just scan the image of the knot and then try to recognize it, because the knots are so similar. What I rather have in mind is that you scan the image of a knot, you produce a certain type of algebraic interpretation of the knot, and then compute one of the classical quantum invariants and use them to identify the knot. So it's kind of a... I think this will work very well, but it's work in progress right now. It's kind of a mixture between the standard machine learning type thing and classical algorithms, right? So you use picture recognition to find an algebraic interpretation and then use a classical algorithm to compute an invariant and to recognize the knot. That's the whole idea. But that's work in progress, and today I would just like to look at this easier problem of simply identifying the number of crossings. It sounds like an easy problem. I hope I have motivated this question at this point. So I think it's a cool problem from a theoretical and from a practical point of view. So I really would like to do that eventually in my life. So the first thing you of course want to do, remember, we want to identify the number of crossings. That's what we want to do. That's the only thing we want to do right now. So the first step is of course you feed it into your favorite AI, ChatGPT in this case, O4 mini results. So a confusion matrix, here's a confusion matrix, and ChatGPT's accuracy is pretty bad. So I was rather surprised. ChatGPT is a large language model. Maybe you shouldn't be too surprised that it's pretty shit for picture recognition. Yeah, but it was pretty bad, as you can see here in this confusion matrix. So here, true label number of crossings, 10, 9, whatever, and predicted label number of crossings, very bad. It's very bad, 50%. In case you've forgotten what a confusion matrix is, let me just remind you. A confusion matrix is simply a generalization of the following. You have predicted conditions, you have actual conditions, and you map them versus one another. You just could have more than two, right? You could have, this is just a binary in my example here. You have a positive or a negative, so that's binary, but you could have more labels. And you really just do the following, right? Think about positive, negative as being you have cancer or you don't have cancer, and so that's the actual condition, this guy here, and the predicted condition is, well, whether a test spits out that you have cancer or you don't have cancer. So what you really want is, of course, that one, the true negative, right? You don't have cancer and the test tells you you don't have cancer. What is less desirable, but still kind of fine from the theoretical point of view, is at least if you have cancer, the test should tell you that you have cancer, right? And the off diagonals are really bad, right? If you don't have cancer and the test tells you you have cancer, that's shit. And you have cancer and the test tells you you don't have cancer, that's also shit. So you really want this confusion matrix, right? Confusion matrix to be a diagonal matrix. The more diagonal, the better. Right? Comes with the diagonal on the diagonal are the correct interpretations, the correct predictions. So here's a confusion matrix again. And it's pretty bad. Look at this bullshit here. So the first that is off from the diagonal, the worse, right? So that's essentially what it is. It's really, really shit. Essentially, ChatGPT just guessed the number of crossings. I was very surprised, as I said, ChatGPT is doing so badly, so poorly. So that doesn't quite work. Okay. So, neural network is this idea of a function that approximates. Do you have a function that you want to approximate? So usually you do something like this. You want to recognize, let's say, numbers, and you convert them into grayscale. Let's say 28 times 28 grid of numbers, something like that. It's maybe easier to see here, right? So just numbers, grayscale, some bunch of numbers, and you really just flatten them into a vector. 28 times 28, you just put them row by row into whatever 700, whatever the numbers are, right? So you just have a vector. So an image is nothing else than a vector. And the output is, in this case, well, 10, just the type of number you have from 0 to 9. So you actually have a function from this input, that's the input size of the image, to this output, because you have 10 values. So the output example is something like this. Ooh, my slides are too large. So you get some probability vector, right? With 60%, this is a 3, something like that. So this is really just a function, right, from a certain space into another certain space. And the task of a neural network is to describe that function. A neural network is an approximation of such an unknown function, right? So this is literally, there should be a function that takes a picture and produces a probability, what type of number it is. And this function is probably very complicated. It's not one of your standard functions. Mathematics is a very tiny part of life. It's not an exp or polynomial. It's a very complicated function. And the idea of a neural network is to approximate that. And what you usually do is kind of you mimic what a neuron does. So you have this type of neural network. And I won't recall what it is. Well, I have recalled it here, but it's not super important for now. There is something that is called a vanilla neural network, which is really just a multi-layer perceptron. That's what people call it. Doesn't matter. Think of it as a device to approximate an unknown function. And yeah, the vanilla one is like the standard one that has been around for a long time. Now, a neural network is this idea that you have an input, you do something in the middle, like with a neuron here. So here for a neuron, you have some input, you do something in the middle, and you have some output. And whatever happens in the middle is essentially some linear, some matrix type stuff. Okay, so it's approximation of an unknown function. Just this is for today's talk, that's totally fine as a black box. Essentially it works like this. The vanilla neural network has some inputs, the weights, the parameters that you can change. You essentially take weighted sum, you have some activation function, and you get an output. Very easy, and you just have 100 of them in a row. Yeah? When you read about neural network, people almost always mean vanilla, unless you're an expert in the field. Then modern research usually uses, or ChatGPT is a beefed up architecture, not a transformer or something. And what I really want to do is I want to use a slightly beefed up architecture, which is called a convolutional neural network. And if you've never seen that in action, there is this beautiful thing, which is called the CNN Explainer. Absolutely fantastic website. Bah, beautiful. So here you have some input, and it's exactly like in my little explanation. It's a picture, so it's this grid of numbers. The only difference is we have now 3 color channels, red, green, and blue, so it's really a colored picture, like the original picture here. And we can click here and see literally what the neural network does, which I'm going to explain in a second. It's a lot of fun to do that yourself. So whatever, doing something like that, and it's beautifully explained what a convolutional neural network is. But I don't want to do that right now. But anyway, that type of thing we wanted to use because it's actually very good for convolutional neural network. It's very good for feature extraction. So I recommend to play around with this website, convolutional neural net, CNN Explainer. It's really, really nice. It will explain what a neural network is. So you have this little sliding thing. It's really beautiful. And you will see what's going on. It's kind of very nice to see that. But I don't want to do that. I want to show you the results, and I don't want to make this video for too long. But essentially it works as follows. You have many, many layers. So think of this as an approximation of a function. And you have convolutional layers, and then you have pooling layers and fully connected layers. And I completely ignore the pooling and fully connected layers. The convolutional layers this is where the name comes from, they should extract features. Yeah? And you have just plenty of them. And in the following way, it works in the following way. You have some kernel, and the neural network will learn what to use for kernel, and you slide it over a picture, and it does exactly. So here's the original, the identity just gives the original picture back, and it has this type of pattern detection, sharpening, blurring effect, right? So this is like a convolution. So you convolute the image by this type of matrix, which is really just to take the weighted sum over the entries in the following sense. You think of this as this little matrix slides over something, and you just take the sum of all of these entries multiplied by the weights of the matrix is the new entry. And then you just slide it over and create a new thing. Yeah. So you have now 9 entries created by taking this little block and taking whatever this entry is times this entry. Whatever this entry is times this entry. Whatever this entry is times this entry. And so on. Take the sum, that thing, and it slides over, and it create a new picture out of an old picture. And here are some examples, right? So this if you slide over this matrix, you get some edge sharpening here, edge detection, you get a sharpening, you get a blur effect. The TikTok filters, whatever, the TikTok beauty filters, they're all using this type of idea of a kernel. So a kernel is some kind of a filter on an image, and the whole point of a convolutional neural network is that this process is called convolution, and you do plenty of them in a row, and you kind of extract like the features here of the coffee, right? So here you extract various different features, like whatever here, and you have this little kernel sliding over. Oh, sorry, I should probably click on something like that. There's this little kernel here sliding over. So can we zoom in a little bit to... It's probably nicer if you do that yourself. Where is now my sliding? Leave me alone. Let's do it like that. Where's my sliding? It's here. Okay, fine. Let's zoom out a little bit. Boop. So here's our matrix, right? The kernel is the one at the bottom, and you slide it over the image, and you create a new value. That's exactly what happens. And you want the neural network to find out what the new value is, and you kind of extract some features, and you just do that like 15 million times until you have extracted enough features that the neural network can decide what picture you're looking at. It's kind of the idea, right? So the picture you're looking at. Okay, and so we trained such a neural network on our little crossing recognition problem. And I just show you the results. So the vanilla one is, well, let's go to the accuracy. Pretty okay. It stabilizes after very few steps. It's pretty okay, right? Test and train. I tell you in a second what I don't like about it. So here's a confusion matrix. It's perfect on the trained data. That's probably bad. And it's not quite perfect on the test data. So what really happens here, and that's why I don't like it. So here it's 100%, it's perfect. And here it's not quite, right? So it's very different, those two pictures. So the trained set is where you train it on, and the test set is then something it hasn't seen. And what it really did, apparently, is it learned the pixel distribution in the image set. And that's why you get this perfect picture here on the left on the trained set where it has been trained on. And then it actually has no idea, right? The pixel distribution for a random knot might be different from the trained knots. Maybe not too different. That's why this matrix is not too bad. But it's kind of not generalizable, right? It learned the pixel distribution of the input images, which is, I don't know, it's not great. So that's well, not great. I mean, it gets good results, but really just because it learned the pixel distribution. Fine. And the weights, so the actual neural network, the actual function is like random noise. Yeah, so this looks pretty random to me. Here are the various weights. We had 5 layers. Yeah, this is just, I don't know. This is just, it learned the pixel distribution. You can't see anything. It's a very, 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 very sad thing. Okay, So it doesn't seem generalizable. And the CNN took a little bit longer to learn, but in the end it's essentially perfect. It's pretty good, right? So it's essentially perfect in the end. And I'm much happier with the confusion matrices. So as you can see, it's not perfect on the left on the train set, but essentially it's the same on the left and on the right, which is great, which is much better than it learns pixel distribution. Here it learned actually something, right? And it recognized the same type of patterns in the test set as in the train set. And I show you in a second what it learned. It's kind of very nice. So I really like this. Okay. So the weights are random as well. And then there's this idea that neural networks are really black boxes. But that's actually not true. Yes and no. So when people talk about we don't know what a neural network does, they usually mean the perceptron, because you have seen the weights of the perceptron, and it's just completely random. So it's some random thing. But the more sophisticated ones, CNNs, transformers, whatever, we actually know very well what they do. So people call them black boxes. But for more sophisticated architectures, you can actually tell what they do. So neural network is not necessarily a black box. And here in this case, you actually see that very well. So what does a neural network actually do on a specific knot image? Here, a trefoil knot, as you can see. So first of all, it kind of extracts the trefoil from the background, and it makes it a little bit. So this is a heat plot. So the values correspond to the heat of the corresponding pixel. The hotter the pixel, the closer it is to 1. The colder the pixel, the closer it is to 0. That's just what it is. So here's the extracted knot, and you can see that what happens here. So here it makes the crossings. It should learn the crossings, right? So it makes the crossings a bit hotter, and you can see that it makes the crossings even a bit hotter. So it kind of learns in each layer what the crossings are. Here, this is really beautiful already. So where the crossings were originally are now like the hot spots of this picture. And in the end, you literally see the hot spots of the picture where the crossings were in the end. So it literally learns the crossings. It's kind of very nice. And you can see that it gets hotter there where the crossings are. It's kind of very nice. So this is far from random. It literally learns what a crossing is. In each step, it gets a bit hotter around the crossing. It literally learns what the crossing is. And then the fully connected layers are random because they're just perceptrons. And this is why the CNN is kind of much better than the vanilla one. The vanilla just learns the pixel distribution, and it's some random map. The CNN actually somehow learns what a crossing is, and it makes me really happy. And the GPT is just guessing. So that's kind of, wow, what's going on here? It's kind of very fun. It was a lot of fun to do that. And what I really had in mind, let me just wrap up and then we are good, is, okay, all fine, but not detection. How can we do this now with picture recognition? Well, I really want to just learn a certain algebraic presentation of a knot, which is called a PD presentation. It's a really easy thing. So here, around each crossing, here's a green crossing, you just have labeled edges 1, 5, 1, 5, 2, 4 if you read in clockwise order, and you literally just write that down. X for crossing, 1, 5, 2, 4. The purple one has 3, 1, 4, 6, 3, 1, 4, 6, and the red one has whatever it is, 5, 3, 6, 2. And this is an algebraic presentation of the knot diagram. And you can literally just read that off from the diagram, and the machine can read that off from the diagram as well. Very similar to the crossing recognition. You now also need to recognize the edges, right? And then just count them, essentially. So that works quite well. And then as soon as you have this algebraic presentation, you can run a classical algorithm to compute, let's say, like the Jones polynomial, and then try to recognize the knot. And this actually is supposed to work very well. And on the final slide, I kind of explain why I expect this to work very well, is because the Jones polynomial is actually a pretty good invariant, and on the small knots and in a random distribution of knots, most knots are small knots. So here essentially in a random distribution of 10 crossing knots, there are whatever, how many of them, and almost all of them are knots. So if you just convert that image into a PD, run a classical algorithm, and you get the trivial polynomial from the classical algorithm, you can be certain that you have the unknot. And whatever, if you get whatever that type of knot, it will essentially not happen. So you get a really good approximation onto the truth. But this is still work in progress. Anyway, so let me repeat. Step 1, take a picture. CNN gives the PD presentation. Compute a classical algorithm to compute whatever the Jones polynomial. And then you can essentially should be able to determine the knot with probability 1, because most knots are easy knots. So I'm kind of using the trick here. I just told you before that knots are very difficult, but most knots are actually easy knots. And on easy knots, the Jones polynomial is essentially a perfect invariant. Yeah, so that's still my dream here, work in progress. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I also hope to see you next time.